Hey everybody! This nostalgia trip was suggested by my good friend Tessa Reed, and I probably owe her my thanks, because this is definitely one of the lost gems of the 90s. Thanks, Tess! Ultima Underworld, the Stygian Abyss, is a spin-off of the Ultima series, which might be familiar to some of you as the root of Ultima Online, an MMO that started in 1997 and, to my surprise, is still going in 2018. Sure, this one stays alive, but nobody plays Puzzle Pirates anymore. Truly, the world is unfair. But the Ultima series has been going much longer than that even, with the very first game being released in 1979 for the Apple II. That's a lot to unpack for right now though, so let's focus on Underworld. Ultima Underworld released in 1992 for MS-DOS. It's part of a class of game people used to call a 3D dungeon crawler, back when 3D didn't really mean what it does today. Almost all games for this genre rely on a singular premise. You're trapped in a dungeon, and must venture several levels down to achieve a goal, the end result being an escape from the dungeon. Seems like it would be simpler to just never boot the game in the first place, but hey, what do I know? There were a lot of games made for this genre, and I've tried a pretty fair amount of them myself, which is why I can say in confidence that this is the best one, hands down, no contest, full stop. There are a lot of reasons for this, and I'm going to do my best to go through them as thoroughly as I can, and hopefully imbue you with the same love for this game that I acquired playing it. Putting the game down so I could put this video together was the hardest part of my month. I'm not even joking. Ultima Underworld isn't the first of this kind of game. That honor is usually given to a game for the Tandy TRS-80 color computer, a game called Dungeons of Dagger, a game released in 1982, a good 10 years prior to Underworld. It's not the best game. The game that popularized the genre, however, was Dungeon Master, released for the Atari ST in 1987, and after that came games like Dungeons & Dragons' Eye of the Beholder series in 1991, each one nicer and shinier than the next. Something you might notice about them, though, is that they all operate on this similar grid-like structure, moving block by block in a stilted fashion. Now I want you to look at Ultima Underworld. Yeah, baby, now we're moving! Underworld makes a lot of improvements over previous entries in this genre, and this is probably the smallest of them, but it does a lot to show off how big this game actually is. And I don't just mean in content, I mean in terms of space, atmosphere, and environment. A lot of dungeon crawlers fall into the trap of building, well, a sort of rat maze. A lot of same-looking corridors and doors, with not really a lot of distinguishing features or landmarks. Underworld doesn't do that, and it's a breath of fresh air, metaphorically speaking. You are, after all, still trapped in a dungeon, but it feels like a dungeon that's living and breathing, with rock walls, moss, mold, and it does this from the get-go, where some games take several levels of gameplay before you start getting something new. Underworld only has 8 levels to its dungeon, which is less than a lot of these games, most of which pride themselves on the hours it takes to complete them, but Underworld makes the best of each level, not letting them bleed together into a featureless maze. Now I'm going to show you something that, if you were a gamer in 1992, would have blown your goddamn mind. That's right, there's a map. Holy Britannia, Batman, I don't think I've ever seen something so beautiful. If you weren't a gamer in 1992, you might be thinking, yeah, so what? And I'll tell you what. In 1992, you were expected to make your own map. With this, and this. And ain't nobody got time for that. But wait. Just when you thought this couldn't get any better, you can make your own notes. This is basically like witchcraft. This is almost like having the internet. I could write my own game FAQ right now. Now speaking of that, how is this game in terms of difficulty? Well, I'll tell you. It's good. It's not a walk in the park by any stretch, but that's not because of any technical complications. Combat is mostly determined by weapon and character stats, and dice rolls that the game performs secretly. But it's balanced well enough such that powerful monsters keep you out of areas you shouldn't be in yet, without making you rely on luck or RNG to pass them when you are ready. And the game usually tells you when you're going to encounter one of these monsters anyway. This isn't really a game about skill. It is an RPG, after all. You really only have to be good at pressing buttons and using your brain goo. This game's challenges are in its puzzles, and those it does very, very well. I'm sure we're all familiar with obtuse puzzles in games, where there's exactly one hint somewhere completely missable, and you're going to lose or get stuck if you mess it up. This isn't one of those games. In fact, for its release time, this game is downright benevolent. Necessary puzzles, those integral to beating the game, usually have more than one hint, either written somewhere or told to you by NPCs, and they're almost always written in such a way that you couldn't possibly misconstrue them as a casual conversation. Favorite spiritual, said that you play it in the right place, wondrous thing happened, but no one, no place. Probably not important. This game has, by the way, a lot of NPCs, and of various fantasy races too, not just the typical humans and dwarves and so on. Your possible allies, presuming you don't just slaughter them all, because you can, include races from trolls to ghouls, and even the lizardmen who have their own language that you can learn. This part I actually have some mixed feelings about, but it's cool in theory. The inclusion of this many NPCs is actually amazing though, because again, this is something that other dungeon crawlers didn't really do. Perhaps to inspire a sense of isolation or danger, or just for developer workload reasons, most dungeon crawlers feel really empty. In most of these games, if you meet an NPC, they're usually incredibly important, or a party member. But Underworld includes just bucket loads of them, and not all of them with a purpose aside from just adding more to the world and the atmosphere. World building, yeah! This is actually one of my favorite things about the game. Maybe it seems like a lot of reading, but it's broken up well with all the running about, and actually talking to people in the world makes me care about the game and what I'm doing in a way that other dungeon crawlers fall short on. This game makes sure that you know it has a plot, that you're going this deep for a reason, and asks for your participation in a story it's building. It hits you with this right from the intro, where you wake up, are framed for a kidnapping, arrested, and sent on a rescue mission in the span of about 3 minutes. Maybe it's just me, but this intro feels really well done, and makes me actually care, even if it's sort of hard to hear some of the dialogue over the music sometimes. That's okay though, because I can barely understand this guy anyway.
A score of us got chased, but it fled into the storage in a bit with poor Ariel.
You what, mate? The whole game falls into that classic trap of caring a bit too much about all the old-timey thous and doth these and so on, but the meat of the writing is pretty enjoyable. This is, after all, a big, long-running franchise for a reason. Underworld itself is a standalone entry, too, so you don't need to know jack about any of the other games to enjoy this one, even if it carries similar themes, such as a heavy emphasis on virtue. That's with a capital V. You know, the big ones. Humility, justice, compassion, all that holy garbage. Interactions with NPCs also go beyond just, I have a quest for you, you did the quest, okay great, in that what you say to them matters, and some of them have more complicated requirements for accomplishing your goal. For instance, going back to the Lizard Man, this puzzle revolves around talking to both of these NPCs, one who speaks only Lizard and the other who translates, in order to convince the former to free the latter. Another of the NPCs, Lord Goldthirst of the Mountain Men, will become very upset with you if you act inappropriately with him, either by calling him a dwarf, which the Mountain Men don't like very much, or by sounding a bit too eager to take a close-up look at his treasure vault. And if you upset him enough, you can bring him and the rest of the Mountain Men down upon you in a fury. See, every NPC has a sort of mood meter, which ranges through friendly, mellow, upset, down to hostile, at which point they're no longer open to conversation and will attack on sight. But up till then, what you say to them can influence their mood, and they'll do different things at different stages. It's honestly pretty great, even if it's not perfect. The game's old, so you can raise somebody's mood very quickly just by repeating dialogue loops that make them happier, but it's still interesting, and it helps lend more consequence to your actions if you mess up. Speaking of messing up, Underworld allows you 4 save slots. All manual saves, of course, but wow! Wow! For reference, Dungeon Master and Eye of the Beholder gave you a grand total of 1. 1 save. You're welcome. Better not save in an unwinnable spot. Dying still kicks you back to the menu, though. It's also hecking terrifying. While we're talking about combat, the combat system in this game is a definite improvement over games like Eye of the Beholder, where you press a button and hope. Underworld gives you 3 attacks you can make with the weapon of your choice, a sword in my case. There's the overhead bash, the slash, and the thrust, accomplished by beginning your attack in the top third, middle third, or bottom third of the screen, respectively. Just being able to see your sword is an improvement, and on top of that, the game's also smart enough to realize when an attack is too high or low to hit a certain enemy. Get down here! Did you notice something there? It's another small thing, but the game has buttons for looking up and down. This is, super cool. If you're into that sort of thing, I guess. It's so cool, look, I can actually see that thing, oh my god. But while I'm singing this game's praises, I should also talk about the things it doesn't do so well. One of the things is how it handles leveling up. You gain levels by fighting enemies, as with most games, and you gain vitality points when you level up. But in order to increase your other stats, you have to then visit one of these shrines, and type in a mantra, which will increase a corresponding stat or collection of stats. The manual, as well as the first shrine room, gives you 3 mantras to begin with, and then you find the other ones throughout the game, either on plaques, scrolls, or through talking with NPCs. This is an interesting way to do things. For one, it means that if you want to keep on top of your stats, you have to visit a shrine every level up, and make sure not to forget or miss the message when it pops up in your text bar. These shrines aren't always in central locations either, meaning that it can be a trek, sometimes to another level if you can't find the one on the level you're on. Furthermore, until you find better mantras, leveling your stats is mostly random. The 3 mantras you're given apply to the following categories: attack, magic, and other, which is stuff like sneak and swimming. But they don't apply levels to all those stats. The attack mantra, Sum Ra, will give you 3 at random, so you could end up getting levels in mace, mace, and mace when your character only uses a sword. If that happens, you either deal with it or reload a save. It's a pretty inconvenient way to do things, and while it's certainly creative, I don't think I would have felt poorly if it were just arrows up and down upon level up like most games do. Not to mention, those other non-attack skills, most of them are entirely useless. Swimming is quickly made irrelevant by a water walking spell you get in the first level that actually has significant amounts of water, and the other stats either get so little use or just don't make a difference. The only one actually worth leveling is Lore, which lets you identify your magical items yourself instead of paying someone else to do it for you. On top of this, missile weapons in general are considered to be pretty much worthless. I gave up on them pretty quickly myself, from a combination of clunkiness to a desire for more inventory space, of which the game gives you frightfully little since it uses a weight system, and as far as I can tell, there isn't really a way to improve this? Maybe they're trying to teach me the virtue of charity by forcing me not to carry so much gold. As if. So, while the combat might be balanced well enough, the leveling system isn't really. It just tries to do too much that it doesn't need to, and not enough that it should. The game also really likes to show off its jump feature. Now, let me be clear, jumping is amazing. Revolutionary. Could you jump in Doom? Heck nah. Doom, by the way, released a year after this game. But Underworld really likes to make you do jumps that are just really a huge pain in the butt. Or the head, as it may be, because most of the ones that cause a problem are ones that have you jump into a space not quite big enough, making it easy to bump your head and fall all the way down. You can take both falling damage and jumping into a wall damage, by the way, making reloading a save the smart choice here, too. You can also make this jump over the door only to find out that it's locked. Heck. It's also worth mentioning that the menu could definitely use some streamlining. Much like old adventure games that went from having a huge verb interface to just 1 or 2 buttons, Underworld could have definitely consolidated a few here, like talk and use for instance, since you never need to use a person, and sorting through the buttons can be intimidating at worst and slow at best. But honestly, that's really all I have to complain about. I wasn't kidding when I said this game was the best of its genre, and I can't believe that I had never played or even heard of it before Tess asked me to make a video on it. There are even newer dungeon crawlers in this style, like Legend of Grimrock released in 2012, that don't come close. Sure, this is a relatively short game compared to other dungeon crawlers that boast 20 levels or more, but I definitely don't think it suffers for it. It's cool to play a game in this style that actually has a story and an engaging atmosphere, and isn't just a slow grind forward. This game has variety, interesting puzzles, good level design, helpful features. It's fun to play even by today's standards, and it doesn't even look like utter garbage. This is the game that dungeon crawlers should aspire to be. A sequel to Underworld and Underworld 2 is scheduled for September 2018, and honestly, if it can hold up to what I've just played, it might end up being my game of the year. Come on, Underworld Ascendant. Don't let me down. I believe in you. Hey! You're still here, huh? You want to see Underworld's PlayStation port? This version of the game was released 5 years later, in 1997, and only in Japan. It's the only Ultima title that made it to the PlayStation, or any console since the SNES actually. For the port, the intro was reimagined, and quite well I might add. I still can't understand what they're saying, but this guy actually sounds quite menacing now. Oh man, just like in my animes. I think my favorite part though is how the troll lumbers away to the beat of the soundtrack. Nice. The game is pretty similar other than this though, pardoning the text, which I unfortunately can't read, partly because I'm not fluent in Japanese, and partly because this font is god-awful. I can read hiragana, but not like this. The controls are unfortunately just as bad, given the fact that it's an adaptation of a mostly point-and-click game. The menu pops up on a separate screen, and it took me quite some time to figure out which button would move an object. But I get it, I don't have the manual, so that one's probably my fault. The real treat here, though, is what they've done with the creatures. Oh my god. This is a rat? I don't even want to kill it. Oh my god, it's on me. I don't know what they did to the combat, but it's much more difficult, and my usual wiggle forward and back strategy doesn't seem to work. This puffed up Nork is kicking my butt, and I don't even know what I'm doing wrong. Hey, Ultima? I don't feel so good. Blech. Don't forget to tell me your thoughts. Blech. Happy gaming!